From APM, American Public Media.
Discover new and classic music every Saturday night starting at 8 with Mr. Al Pete as we stroll through the neighborhood. And then stay tuned for Bop City, Electro Lounge, and Blues Horizon, only on WJCT News 89.9 Saturday nights.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. In Central Texas, search crews continue to look for more than 160 people missing after catastrophic flooding last week that left at least 120 people dead. Hundreds of people attended a vigil last night to remember the victims. Jake Ramsey says his 61-year-old father died in the floods as he camped with his wife. He left his kids voicemails before he was swept away.
It's just my dad telling us he loves us. And he loves my sister, and you know he pretty much said, "I think this is it." So it was short and sweet, but yeah.
But Ramsey says there was some good news. His dad's dog Chloe was rescued. Meanwhile, new data from NPR and data scientists shows FEMA failed to include at least 17 Camp Mystic buildings in flood maps. With his eyes on the midterm elections, Elon Musk says he's starting a new political party. He's calling it the American Party and says voters want a middle ground option. As NPR's Elena Moore reports, it's something that could appeal to a key group Trump made gains with last fall, young men.
Third parties often take away votes from major parties in close races. That could be a problem in the midterms. Plus, men under 30 are a valuable group for Republicans to hold on to. They were key to Trump's win last fall. But they're not reliable Republican voters. Polling shows that young men are uniquely critical of both political parties.
We still don't have a great idea of where young men are going to go. Like, where are Gen Z men going to be in 20 years when it comes to their politics?
That's Dan Cox with the conservative-leaning American Enterprise Institute. Though he's unsure if Musk's party can attract these voters, he says there's a huge opportunity to engage with them. Elena Moore, NPR News.
In Southern California, the Diocese of San Bernardino is the first to formally lift the obligation for Catholics to attend Mass. That's in response to immigration detentions on church property. Aleha Hertzler-McCain of Religion News Service has more.
Catholics are usually obligated to go to Mass on Sundays and other holy days, but Bishop Alberto Rojas has paused that requirement in San Bernardino for people who may fear immigration raids. The San Bernardino Diocese told the National Catholic Reporter that immigration agents carried out detentions on 2 of its properties in June. Catholic leaders across the country say they're witnessing steep decreases in Mass attendance in response to immigration actions taken by the Trump administration. The Diocese of Nashville said in May that Catholics aren't obligated to go to Mass if it puts their safety at risk. San Bernardino, a diocese of over 1 million Catholics, is the first to issue a special dispensation. For NPR News, I'm Aleha Hertzler-McCain.
U.S. futures contracts are trading lower at this hour. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. Clay County residents can talk to Sheriff Michelle Cook during a community town hall this evening. Cook will be joined by Clay County Judge Ray Forbes and an Intercept Task Force detective to discuss issues and answer questions. That meeting gets going at 6 at Sacred Heart Catholic Church on US 17 in Fleming Island. A $4 million land deal is preserving critical habitat for endangered Florida panthers. Steve Newborn reports a ranch in Highlands County bordering known panther habitat is being saved from development.
The 1,000-acre AP ranch is next to a biological preserve. It can continue operating, but a conservation easement prohibits development there. At least 3 panthers were tracked on the property, said Tracy Dean. She's CEO of Conservation Florida, which partnered with 2 federal agencies to protect the migration corridor.
We have other endangered species calling this place home. And so this is a part of Florida that we have many of our wide-ranging mammals utilizing these types of properties, and we're losing properties like this rapidly.
The Department of Defense helped pay for the easement. Dean says officials at nearby Avon Park bombing range want to keep much of the surrounding area undeveloped. I'm Steve Newborn in Tampa.
It'll be a warm afternoon here in Jacksonville and Northeast Florida. Highs will reach the low to mid 90s today before isolated storms develop along the St. Johns River Basin this afternoon.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include AG1, introducing AG1 Next Gen, a daily drink with vitamins, minerals, and probiotics to support overall health. Learn more at drinkag1.com/science.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, spreading sewage sludge on farmland stands to cost taxpayers millions in cleanup costs and harm the St. Johns River in the meantime. We discuss the findings of a new financial and environmental assessment. Later in the program, a rigorous 6-year program helps bright students transition from financial straits to college success. But first, the sludge report. More than 2/3 of the sewage sludge produced in Florida is disposed on land in the St. Johns River Basin. Much of that is trucked up from South Florida. A new report says this disparity is costing the region plenty, both financially and environmentally. Here to talk about it is John November. He's the attorney and executive director of the Public Trust for Conservation. Good morning, John.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So the Public Trust commissioned this report by an independent economic and engineering consulting firm called the Balmoral Group, and it is being released just this morning. But what did you ask them to look at? And broadly speaking, what did they find?
Yeah, we've known for a long time about the environmental impacts of the biosolids land application process in the St. Johns River Basin and have been trying to protect our basin. Now we finally understand the economic impacts. And unfortunately, the practice of hyper concentrating biosolids in our basin is going to leave us with a cleanup liability of around $1.12 billion over the next 40 years. So it was really important to understand that we are, as a community, being forced to cover these costs long term, and knowing the economic exposure is really important for our community.
And I want to get down into a little bit more of a breakdown of the costs that we're talking about, cleanup versus kind of external other costs on top of that number that you just said. But let's begin by just explaining for people who don't know, what are biosolids?
Great question. So when a wastewater treatment plant gets human and commingled industrial waste, they take the water out of it. And the leftovers, that's what we call sewage sludge. And then the sewage sludge is usually lightly treated up to a standard and heavy metals are reduced. And then at that point, it's trucked away from the facility and brought either to a landfill or land applied. And the land application of biosolids is used at either ranches or at farms to grow grass. But unfortunately, they're not just getting nitrogen, the main nutrient that's needed to grow grass. They're also getting a lot of nasties, and they're also getting an imbalance in the amount of phosphorus that's entering the ecosystem. And that imbalance of phosphorus causes algae blooms, specifically blue-green algae blooms and microcystis, which can be toxic to both humans, wildlife, and the natural environment.
And there are different levels that biosolids can be treated to. And so when we're talking about sewage sludge, we're talking about this Class B, kind of the lowest level of treatment. If people are watching our live stream, they'll see some images of land application of the sludge, but also there's an image, for instance, of someone holding something that looks like dirt in their hands. That's not what we're talking about. That really is this higher treatment that is sometimes used even by people at their homes. Pellets are kind of this dirt-like material that is treated to a higher degree, but we're talking about something that's not quite that clean.
Yeah, we're talking about something that's much sludgier, much wetter, much smellier, and doesn't go through that higher level of treatment. We actually are major proponents of treating the biosolids and the sewage sludge to higher levels, turning it into compost, turning it into a fertilizer product that can actually be applied agronomically. The issue with Class B biosolids from a nutrient perspective, and that's what feeds the algae blooms that we're most concerned about in the St. Johns River, is that you have a stable amount of nitrogen to phosphorus. So when you apply the nitrogen that you need to grow crops, you unfortunately almost always get too much phosphorus. And that's a real problem. But there are products that limit the amount of phosphorus that can be applied agronomically. And we're hoping that our state continues to move in that direction so that we have valuable and sustainable products. And this can be not just a waste, not a disposal, but actually a reuse that's beneficial to our society as a whole. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening right now.
And so it's important to note that this report that you are releasing this morning is looking specifically at those costs that are related to nutrient pollution and how that impacts the St. Johns River and the St. Johns River Basin. There are other chemicals and pollutants contained in this material, and we will talk about them a little bit later. Those include things like forever chemicals, sometimes known as PFAS. It includes things like pharmaceuticals, pesticides, microplastics. Those are all other things that are often contained or almost always found to some degree in biosolids. This report is not looking at those directly or the costs that might be associated with those, but we will talk about those. Let's start, though, if we can, by talking about why the lower St. Johns Basin is getting so many of these biosolids.
It's a frustrating thing. It's an unintended consequence of a piece of state legislation that was passed back in 2007. The people of South Florida were seeing the Everglades collapse because of this practice of land applying biosolids in the industrial and agricultural areas directly outside of the Everglades. And they decided to pass a piece of state legislation saying we are no longer going to allow the land application of biosolids in South Florida. So what do we do starting in 2013 when the rule becomes effective? Well, let's truck it just far enough north where the ban is no longer effective and land apply on these rural, often underserved communities of the upper St. Johns River Basin and do the cheapest and dirtiest thing. And that happens to have really unfortunate unintended consequences on the St. Johns River. We've actually, since 2013, now we're looking at a dozen years of application. And unfortunately, even if we stopped right now, the legacy nutrients, the legacy impacts of this practice is going to be felt by us for the next decades, maybe centuries.
And we're looking at a map right now for those watching our live stream that show the application sites county by county. And you can see, none in South Florida, and then this real intensification around Central Florida, which for people who don't know the geography of the St. Johns River, that is the headwaters. It's a north flowing river. And so those tributaries, those lakes that are being impacted basically then carry up through the rest of the St. Johns River. And that's where we see the algal blooms.
Yeah, unfortunately, that comes up right through the St. Johns River, past Jacksonville, and right on out to the Atlantic Ocean. We are hoping to mobilize the communities of the upper St. Johns River, St. Johns County, Flagler County, Duval County, to say that this practice must stop. I mean, it's been an inequity that's survived for a dozen years now, and we're hoping that it gets limited through rule changes that we fought for in 2020. But unfortunately, some land appliers haven't been consistently applying within the bounds of the law, and it's important as a legal advocacy organization that we are there to ensure that the laws are followed.
And we know that when this shift happened in 2013, we were seeing significantly higher volumes of biosolids moved to this area, disposed of in this area, and regulators know that at the same time, the level of pollutants in the river was surging, that kind of followed right along with it, even though the amount of agricultural land has greatly diminished because of development. And you would expect, I think the report says that the amount of agricultural land in that area declined from 360,000 acres in 2006 to just 190,000 acres roughly today. But that the nutrient loading, the pollution of those nutrients remains the same.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, we need agriculture to grow food. It's an important part of our society, but it's shrinking. And the fact that the nutrients are still increasing, there has to be an explanation. And published research from the St. Johns River Water Management District directly correlates the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen impairments, which means polluted water bodies in the St. Johns River, to the practice of land applying biosolids. I don't want to say that there aren't other sources of pollution. There are. There's lots of issues for us to work on, but the massive transfer of the negative environmental externalities from South Florida to North and Central Florida is truly alarming. And it has been alarming to me and the St. Johns River Keeper and a number of our other partners who've been working on this issue for a number of years. But we've never been able to, and I don't think it's ever been done across the entire country, maybe the world, an actual economic analysis, not just of the economic impacts on the site where farms are closing in Maine and Michigan because they have PFAS pollution, because they have these emerging contaminants of concern, but also downstream. There are impacts outside of where these biosolids are being land applied. And now that we can finally understand what the lower bounds of those are, because we're just talking about phosphorus pollution. If you think about the unintended or unknown consequences of the PFAS issues, which we're just beginning to understand, and other emerging contaminants of concern, the cleanup liabilities could actually be worse. So it's time as a state to take this seriously.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the financial and environmental costs of sewage sludge disposal in the state. You can join our conversation if you have comments or questions by calling 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or X at FCC On Air. I am talking to attorney John November about this. And so let's talk a little bit more about the cost, because this analysis looked at projected cleanup costs over a 40-year period of specifically the impact of the phosphorus, this nutrient pollution. And you found in that report, of the analysis, the consultant found that it could be up to $1.4 billion. But they also looked at something, more indirect, the cost of, for instance, lost property value, lost recreational value, lost ecosystems, that are no longer functional. And they looked at some previous events that have actually caused an impact on land, on property values, which I thought was interesting. They looked at, for instance, like how a red tide, how a toxic algae bloom actually causes people's home values, if they live along or near the river, to drop.
Fishermen obviously care about the health of our river, people who want to swim in our river, which it's upsetting to me that a lot of times it's not safe to swim in our river. Hopefully that changes in the future. But this now hits home to everyone. The fact that these algal blooms could affect our property values throughout Northeast Florida, and the fact that the increasing algal blooms over time caused by this practice could hit our pocketbooks. That's a serious concern to many, and recreational values are significantly diminished when there's these algal blooms. People, if you swim, and dogs often, if they swim in these waters, can get violently sick, and dogs have even died. So it can have really massive indirect impacts, and it's nothing to shy away from. It's time as a state to invest in the infrastructure and innovative technologies that can deliver us from this problem. It's not all doom and gloom. There are wastewater treatment facilities coming online in the state of Florida that are turning these biosolids into valuable products, and the private market is ready to come in and make it happen. But if we allow people to keep on doing the cheapest and dirtiest thing, that's what they're going to keep on doing, because taxpayers in South Florida are going to have rate increases if they are not allowed to continue dumping their waste on the headwaters of the St. Johns River. But it's an imperative that we no longer allow this transfer of these negative costs, both for the environment and economically, from South Florida to North and Central Florida. And we want to build a coalition to stop it.
Got a message from Michael on Instagram saying there is a sludge removal industry aiming to get our tax dollars for perpetual muck removal in Florida. The true root causes of muck in Florida waterways is myriad. However, our dollars must first be spent on improved wastewater treatment facilities, residential/commercial septic system closures, and stormwater management. Beware treating systems and not causes when funding Florida's environmental problems. We also have a call from Jim in Jacksonville. Good morning, Jim. Go ahead.
Hi, Jim Simcoe. I'm a power engineer. I work in the wastewater industry, and I think your guest is very much correct. It's a lack of political will. The technology to deal with sludge in an effective and economical way is not new and it's not difficult. The Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District finances itself directly off of the commercial sales of milorganite, which is a nitrogen fixant literally made from irradiated and cooked leftover activated sludge after the treatment process. Effectively, the buyback period to be able to treat on a county, it went in, especially in an agricultural state like Florida, you're looking at a buyback period of about 15 years for an effective wastewater treatment facility where you're only pushing effluent into the St. John's and you're not pushing sludge in. But realistically, a buyback period of 15 to 20 years if you can commercially sell your saved sludge as a nitrogen fixant to the agricultural community.
Jim, I'm not sure what you mean by a buyback period. Can you explain what that means?
Yes. So when you do a large capital project, the buyback period is effectively how long it takes to pay off the capital investment plus interest based off of the revenue you receive.
Gotcha.
Both from rate hikes and from ancillary sales, like in this case, selling deactivated sludge.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. John, you're nodding to that. I mean, there are facilities in Florida that do treat sewage waste to a higher level, and it is sold, often as, a product. Compost, right? People will put it on their gardens. And, to Jim's point, it can be irradiated, it can be cooked. A lot of pollutants can be resolved in that way. But does that take care of things like PFAS or these pollutants of emerging concern, pesticides, microplastics?
Not always. It kind of depends if the source of the sewage sludge is commingled industrial and human waste. If it's just human waste, the only thing that we really got to worry about is pharmaceuticals making its way into the...
Which is no small thing.
It's no small thing, and it's still of concern, but hopefully and it's diluted enough to that won't be that concerning. But PFAS, for example, is cancer causing. And so, unfortunately, unless you heat these materials to a very high level, very high temperatures, the fluoride bonds in those PFAS don't break down. That's why they're called forever, except if you heat them to very, very high levels. So in Indiantown, there's actually a new facility going in that heats the biosolids to such a high level that the PFAS does come out and is broken down in most circumstances. JEA is actually doing Class AA biosolids. They're just investing into their Buckman facility now to do that as we speak. And so that's a very positive development, but it's going to take time. PFAS still will remain a concern. Their technology is turning it into more pellets that you referred to earlier, which then can be treated to higher levels. And hopefully, frankly, phosphorus and nitrogen are very valuable, but phosphorus is not valuable here in Florida because we don't need it. But across the world, phosphorus is incredibly valuable. So if we can actually get this product dried and turn into a more stable product like we'll have in Jacksonville, we can then hopefully send it to fertilizer manufacturers who can use this as the base material as opposed to mining phosphorus, which has its own environmental issues. So
right.
There is hope.
Yeah. We've got a call from John on the South Side. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the interesting educational conversation. I'm just curious, does this cast shade on what we've been told for decades, that the principal source of phosphorus pollution was non-point source pollution, chemicals from runoff from our fertilizing of lawns and that sort of thing, versus point source pollution? Does this fall into the point source category? And that's all. Thank you.
Good question, John. Typically we think of point source as kind of a factory. Does agricultural land use of a biosolid count as a point source or kind of a non-point source? And to his point, what is the role of just fertilizers on lawns and stormwater runoff?
Great question. So it's a little bit nuanced, but when they land apply the biosolids onto the farms, that's a point source because it's coming out of a discrete conveyance onto the land. When it leaves the land, typically through either runoff, if there's rain, so if they do it during rainy season, or if the groundwater's high, it'll run off the surface, but mostly it's actually coming into the groundwater. And when it comes into the groundwater, then makes its way directly into the St. Johns River. We now know that how porous the limestone is in Florida, so it's all connected. That is a non-point source.
But his question is kind of more like we've been told typically that the primary culprit is, maybe lawn fertilizer
Yeah.
and these non-point sources. And I think he's curious how big of a deal is this relative to those other sources?
Recently, there's been a lot of really cool research into this, actually. And unfortunately, what we're finding, and we don't want to hear it, is that it's us. It's our waste. It's our human waste, which is one of the number one contributors to pollution problems. People in South Florida wanted to, for example, blame the massive algae blooms they were having both on the east and west coasts on fertilizer pollution coming from the sugar industry, et cetera. But when a isotope study was done to actually pinpoint the exact type of pollution that was entering the system, they found that a vast majority of it was actually coming from septic tanks and sewage.
Mhm.
So it's difficult to separate biosolids from other types of human waste because it has the same nutrient signatures. So it's a combination, though. We don't, it's important that we continue to apply fertilizer in a responsible way because it's all part of the nutrient budget. Unfortunately, in the lower St. Johns River Basin where we are here in Jacksonville, we've spent so much time and so much money reducing the amount of nutrients entering our system as a whole.
Aren't we the upper?
We're the lower. The upper is I know
Oh,
it's
I've
confusing
got it backwards. Okay, I'm
because it
sorry.
makes its way up the
Okay.
St. Johns River from the base of it. It's all connected though. So we have something called a basin management action plan where we're actually taking definitive steps to reduce the amount of nutrients in our system in both the Jacksonville area and then a little farther south. Well, unfortunately, there is no BMAP. There is no plan for reducing nutrients at the headwaters of the St. Johns River. So there's no active management happening there, which results in massive increases in the amount of nutrients entering the system. So it's a massive problem that's not being challenged effectively.
And so that relates to a question that we have from Cindy on Facebook because she says, "Great topic. Curious what the reason would be for the state not to regulate this in a more environmentally responsible way. This seems like a no-brainer. Thanks for bringing this to our attention, John." And I want to ask you about that because one of the sources, um, certainly one of the producers of sludge and biosolid application in that area is a company that is currently not in compliance with state regulations, and it's been allowed to apply excess biosolids beyond what the state law specifically says at this point is the limit. So tell us what's happening. Why is it that they're allowed to operate out of compliance? Why isn't the state, punishing them?
Yeah. So in 2020, our Florida legislature passed something called the Clean Waterways Act that basically did do a better job of protecting our environmental resources from the threat of biosolids. As a part of that 2020 bill, they gave communities, mostly in South Florida, where our most concentrated populations are, 3 years, up to 3 years, to come up with a plan for what else they were going to do with this stuff. Unfortunately, that type of planning and investment in infrastructure didn't really happen. And so when June 21st, 2023 rolled around and it was time to apply these biosolids in an agronomic way, which means applying it based on what a crop needs, not applying it based on how much waste we need to dispose, which is currently what's happening in a lot of farms in Central Florida where this practice is occurring. They basically said, woe is me. This is too expensive. We don't have a plan. We don't know where to put it. And did a back and forth process with FDEP to essentially delay the application of the new rules that would be more protective of the St. Johns River. And we have been absolutely advocating every week to make sure that this is happening. And finally, just this week, it looks like there is going to be an enforcement order, a consent order entered into between the FDEP and H&H to bring them into compliance with the law. They are going to have a small, short off-ramp time to give them time because, H&H is not a villain here. They are disposing of the waste that is being generated by all of us. We're all Floridians here. And we all need to come up with more sustainable solutions to produce this waste. And there is going to be increased costs to not do the cheapest and dirtiest thing. But over time, as we invest in that infrastructure, those costs should come down. Just like the caller said, there's a payback period where if you invest in the new technologies, it actually can become both financially and certainly environmentally sustainable over time.
And we should say we did reach out to H&H Liquid Sludge Disposal. They're based in Suwannee County, and they've been disposing of biosolids for about 30 years. We didn't hear back from them, but they do have a statement on their website that says H&H takes pride in our commitment and everyday actions that help promote a sustainable environment. Each year, our company finds new ways to reduce and reuse materials. H&H is committed to enhancing and preserving the environments in which we work. So, John, I mean, you say now there's this consent order, which is basically kind of a legal agreement between regulators and a polluter of some kind.
Exactly.
And so is that something that you expect would have any immediate impact on the water quality in the St. John's? And I kind of want to get back to the point that you made about the legacy of these pollution inputs, because sometimes the year or two after an application isn't even the boom year for when you're going to see nutrient levels spike.
Yeah, so I don't know if it would be like immediate because this is such a large system, but they are the single largest land applier of Class B biosolids in the entire state of Florida. So it is a big deal. Deseret previously was one of the largest land appliers. They've actually stopped applying Class B biosolids. We think it's because of the fears related to PFAS and other pollutants of emerging concern because they might want to develop that land in the future. So this is the single largest and only major facilities or appliers that are still applying above the limits allowed. So I do anticipate over the next couple of years we'll start to see reductions. I actually do believe that the earth is very resilient. The St. Johns River can be very resilient, but we got to give it a helping hand. And this is an opportunity for us to allow the laws to be followed and allow for our fishing and wildlife to be able to respond. So I do believe that it will happen for us long term, but unfortunately, when these pollutants enter the system, they stay there until they're used. And unfortunately, invasive species and algae are the ones that are most opportune when it comes to using these nutrients. And so over many decades, it's going to take time, but I believe that the St. Johns River can begin to return to where it was, but it's going to take time.
I want to ask you about reuse of land because there, a lot of this land, as we say, is making the change from agricultural to housing very often or other kinds of development. And there is so much we don't know about the impact of things like PFAS pollution, but there is study, in that area. The Water Keepers Alliance recently came out with a report I think last month or the month before about how heavily associated biosolids are with pollutants of emerging concern and PFAS. And it has led some states to shut down, cropland, agricultural uses of land because they've been polluted.
Yeah.
And so what do you anticipate the cost of those kinds of impacts being? Because it seems that, while phosphorus and nutrient pollution, as you say, the river's resilient, those things can be perhaps mitigated. Those can be cleaned up. Some things like forever chemicals, it seems like it'd be a lot harder and a lot more expensive.
Yeah. We as a state are, Florida specifically, lacking knowledge about how significant the issue of PFAS really is. Back in 2024, the Public Trust was able to get legislation all the way through 3 committee meetings of the Senate, and we're not able to get it to move in the House at all, related to identifying the sources of PFAS pollution. Now, there is domestic sources of PFAS pollution, your Teflon pans and other minor sources, but by identifying where the PFAS is at the industrial source and finding strategies to reduce it is critical to stopping that moving into the future. And unfortunately, our legislature didn't decide to gather that key information to know the full extent of this problem. But hopefully we continue to take steps and follow the leads of other communities across the country
when the legislature votes and says we don't want to know where this is coming from, we're not going to look into that. Who are the voices that are pushing back on the request to find out more? Like who are the Who's lobbying against learning more about the sources of PFAS?
They're silent assassins a lot of the time. We don't know exactly who's lobbying it against it because their children drink the same water we do. So I don't know why they would not want to have more information on this topic, because I think it's critical to say that we're not trying to regulate it until we know the extent of the problem. We know the extent of the various contaminants of concern that are in the water, and maybe how we can control it at the source. Don't be punitive. Instead, find out collaborative solutions for if there is a known problem. Many entities will want to take action to solve it. But unfortunately, it does put a bullseye on their back if they're known polluters, and so they'd rather have their head in the sand and not address the situation rather than come up with fruitful solutions.
Sure, big costs associated. Just briefly, we got an email from Alex saying the Navy has a novel waste disposal system on Ford-class aircraft carriers manufactured by a Canadian company called Plasma Arc Waste Disposal System. It uses high-voltage plasma to, quote, burn waste. The byproduct is elemental gases and non-toxic effluent. This would be a good use for the extra capacity JEA bought with their new nuclear power plant. That's in Georgia. Just briefly, John, I mean, this report has now been released this morning. It's available. People can find a link to it on our website. What would you urge people to do if they're interested in this issue?
Yeah, learn more. Consider joining our coalition of entities who are going to communicate with policymakers, regulators, and our local government entities to say, hey, we need a voice in this matter. So for so long, we've kind of been a forgotten stakeholder here. The South Floridians certainly didn't want to see their Everglades collapse. We certainly don't want to see the St. Johns River collapse, and we certainly don't want this to affect our property values, our ability to recreate in the key resource of Northeast Florida, which is our St. Johns River. And it's time to grow a voice and make sure that we're equally represented in Tallahassee and Washington to ensure these protections are included.
All right, John November, attorney and executive director for Public Trust for Conservation. Thanks so much for being here.
It's been my pleasure.
All right. Up next, helping First Coast scholars surmount financial barriers to college success. Welcome back. A local program designed to help scholars clear the hurdles of economic disadvantage is celebrating its second year. Thrive Scholars, I should say in Jacksonville, its second year, Thrive Scholars offers high-achieving, under-resourced students what they need to succeed in college and beyond. Here to tell us about it is Hannah Oberholzer. She's the executive director of Thrive Scholars Jacksonville. Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Deja Lee. She's a Thrive Scholars student here from Jacksonville. She's a business school major currently going into her sophomore year at the University of Michigan.
Good morning.
Good morning, Deja. Nice to have you. And we're also joined by Calvin Alsop. He is a retired financial planner and Deja's mentor. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. So if we can, let's start, Hannah. This is a 6-year program, the Thrive Scholars program, and fairly new to Jacksonville. Can you explain to us kind of what services it offers students and why it is kind of built around this 6-year intensive model?
Sure. So, Thrive Scholars, we are a college to career accelerator, is like how I like to describe it. We provide a 6 year continuum of support for these high achieving students from under resourced communities to help them get into top schools and then graduate with high trajectory careers. So, we know that high school graduation is not enough. College graduation is not enough. We want our students to be able to create that economic mobility and financial security for themselves. And in turn, we see our students uplifting their families, leading in their careers, mentoring younger students. So the impact multiplies and helps us build better communities and build a better Jacksonville.
And so Thrive's idea is, there's very often this push on helping kids who are academically gifted get to college. And then sometimes forgotten in that matrix is like what it takes to sort of stay in college, to succeed in college, the other barriers that can exist for kids who are coming from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. And so what does Thrive offer in addition to just kind of like helping get that application in and get accepted?
That's right. So we kind of tackle 5 key inflection points over the course of the 6 years where we know there are extreme and often invisible barriers that these students face. Despite our scholars graduating high school with 4.0 GPAs, many of our students were getting into college and not prepared for the academic rigor. So our students began the program going to spend 6 weeks on a college campus where they're studying 3 hours a day of calculus, 3 hours a day of intensive writing to get prepared for the academic rigor of school, to foster those necessary critical thinking skills that are going to be required once they get to college. And then you're getting all of these ancillary benefits of being on a college campus. Oftentimes for our students, it's the first time they're going on a plane, and they're spending significant time away from their families, but they're meeting students from across the country who have similar backgrounds, but most importantly, shared goals and aspirations and dreams. So they're learning from one another. They're pushing each other to succeed.
And Deja, you have, we said you're going into your second year. Are there certain things that the program was able to be helpful to you with that might have been stumbling blocks otherwise?
I think definitely in my first year, even in just summer academies, I met a fellow student that is at the University of Michigan with me, and having even just one person in my fellow classes who knew where I was coming from, who knew the struggles that came with it in a faraway place, it was definitely a huge adjustment. But even being at summer academies, physically just learning those time management skills, learning to be in a whole different place, Thrive pushed me to break all those standards.
And you went to Sandalwood here in Jacksonville. Tell us a little bit about how you learned about Thrive, how you got involved in it, and why you wanted to be a Thrive Scholar.
Sure. I was on the early college program, and so I learned about Thrive in my junior year where I was off campus, but I received an email from one of my counselors saying, oh, there's a trip to UNF, and if you want to go, it's about Thrive Scholars. I'd never heard of the program, and so I didn't have class during that time, so I said, you know what, I might as well go. I went, and I met the most passionate people I could have met. They wanted to just see us succeed, and you could definitely tell that just through their voice, through the message they carried. And so I applied. I felt like it was a shot in the dark, but I definitely don't regret a thing. It was a hard process just thinking about, oh, this is a future I want to see for myself. And so just putting in that work there was a big thing. But once I got accepted, I met another student from my school. And so that was finding comfort there was definitely one thing, because you get introduced to so many different people. It was around over 200 of us. And so it's a whole different group and community. But like Hannah said, we have so many like shared goals and aspirations, no matter what career we want to go into. And so that was definitely a big help.
Yeah. And Calvin, as we said, was your mentor. Calvin, talk about what kind of what role you have played in terms of Deja's, work and her success in college, but also how you got involved in mentoring in the first place.
hmm I had an interest in helping youth go to college. So I started looking for some youth to sponsor, but I found out did not have the organization, the structure. Then I had a friend who introduced me to Thrive Scholars and Hannah, and looked over the program and had the structure in the organization. So I started to participate, and she's one students that I sponsor, and she's so smart that they do everything on their own, but if something comes up and I can provide a little guidance, I will do so.
Can you think of something that you've been able to help her with, some task or some assignment or some, um, issue that she was facing that you were able to kind of give her a little guidance on?
Yeah, I think my background is I'm a retired financial planner, investment advisor. So on the finances part, as far as saving money and having structure, is where I can comment. And then from my college experience many decades ago, stay focused, get the homework done, and don't fall behind.
Yeah. And Hannah, so this is, as we said, this is new to Jacksonville, but there are Thrive Scholar hubs all over the country in Boston, Los Angeles, Chicago. What makes a city kind of receptive to the program? Why was Jacksonville selected?
That's a great question, and I am so proud that Northeast Florida is the first site in the Southeast that Thrive has expanded into. And the role that Thrive needs to play in any of our markets is a true partner in this larger ecosystem of work that's being done across sectors to really move the city forward. And that's how I see the work here and how our community has really just jumped in and seen us seen our role in this work. So I think that true partnership in community is critical to any region that we expand into. We want to work with the communities and all stakeholders across the community to ensure that we're working alongside one another through our mission to help make Jacksonville a more vibrant place to live, work, and play.
And so, what are the criteria for kids who are interested in becoming Thrive Scholars? When we talked about kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, is there also an emphasis on trying to bring students of color into the program? What are the parameters and who should apply or reach out if they're interested?
Sure. So we work with high achieving, talented students, determined, motivated students, where there's a whole, and Deja can speak to the comprehensive application component that really mirrors a college application. But we're looking for students with typically 3.8 GPA or higher. We are looking at their socioeconomic status. We're looking at those extracurricular activities, community involvement, and or are you working after school? And that's important. So we want to make sure we're looking at your test scores. If you have taken the SAT, ACT, PSAT, we're looking at the whole student. We're looking at the counselor's recommendations where the students do a video interview as well. They're answering Common App essays. So a huge part of the program starts off in that college access space where students are getting ready to apply for school. And it is one of so students, Deja got paired with a college access manager from our team who took that initial application into Thrive and those the Common App essays and expanded upon those to help transition those into those college applications. And we're helping the students navigate that application process, the financial aid process, to find the best fit schools for them. Oftentimes our students.
What age, at what point in their high school career should kids be thinking about Thrive? And is it too late if somebody's a junior or senior already and they haven't connected?
I would say start thinking about Thrive early on because we do look at that academic rigor. We're looking at, are you taking the hardest courses available to you? So to make yourself competitive for the program, we're looking at the arc of your high school experience. But the application process itself begins that fall semester of junior year. And it is a very intentional timeline. You can't join the program once at any point over the 6 years. So it's important that you stay with us from start to finish so that we can provide those tailored holistic supports.
And we're talking, Deja, a lot about the academic rigor in the process and the intensity of the program. But just briefly, we should say it's not, you are also a competitive weightlifter and you're doing that at school as part of your education there. And so there are outlets that you're enjoying that are just beyond the textbook.
Oh, definitely. I think Thrive, like Hannah said in the application, it's extremely holistic. And so I felt they weren't just looking at me as a student at my GPA, no matter how high of test scores I got, they wanted to see me as a person grow. And you can definitely see that in the people. Every time a person I've communicated within Thrive, they just want to see me succeed. Whether it's our professors that we met over the summer, they say, oh, email us about how things are going and how you're doing. And they just want updates to just see you being happier and see you doing better. And so I would say it's definitely a good thing that the way Thrive looks at us. They view us as we're just not just students. We're people who want to help our communities and give back. And so they make sure to do that.
Well, Deja, congratulations. I think she sounds like you're a great representative of Jacksonville for the program, but it's nice to meet you and have a great sophomore year.
Thank you.
All right. Hannah, Calvin, thank you so much for being here as well. Appreciate it. Up next, First Coast Theater gets a boost as a new performing arts troupe takes center stage.
Congaree and Pen, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpen.com. Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, the story of us and you, steps you into a treasure trove of memories, now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org.
For more than 40 years, he's brought to life the stories of America. Now, Ken Burns turns his lens to the struggle that created America. The American Revolution, coming fall 2025 on PBS and the PBS app.
Together, New York, we're going to freeze the...
Zohran Mamdani handily won New York City's Democratic mayoral primary. He's a self-declared Democratic socialist with a populist platform, and that's making other Democrats across the country nervous. Populism and the Democratic Party, that's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
President Trump's mega bill has major implications for the future of clean energy in the U.S. What does this legislation mean for the cost of electricity and the country's climate goals? How the sweeping bill could affect the green economy. That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. A new theater group celebrates its new beginnings with a bit of a classic show. Here to tell us about the inaugural performance at River City Theater is Stephen Billy. He's the executive artistic director at River City Theater. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Katie Rollerson Padilla. She's the choreographer at River City Theater for the show Oliver. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, it's nice to have you, Katie. So I guess I would just start by asking, why another theater? We're starting River City Theater. There's other theaters in town. What is different? What is needed in the Jacksonville artistic landscape that calls for this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say Jacksonville has such a rich theater scene already that's there in existence. So, we are not necessarily wanting to have a theater organization that takes over in any way as far as that goes, but really collaborating and contributing to the theater scene.
Mm-hmm.
And we're very focused on, quality of life and enhancing the quality of life through the arts. So really the partnership there. I think something that you see often in Jacksonville is, proscenium shows, and you do have some more intimate shows. But one thing we really wanted to focus on was staging in a unique way, something outside the box. And in the space that we're performing in, Betsy Leavitt Hall at the Good Shepherd, the Episcopal Church, is going to be 128 seats. So, if you come and see it, it's going to be in the round. So you're thinking about it that way. That's a very different approach than when you're 15 feet away from the stage and seeing it staged in that way. And if you come, more than one night, you're going to have a completely different experience too, because that's a different angle. And that's also a unique way to think about it as well.
Yeah. And so theater in the round is a whole different challenge. I'm thinking your work as a choreographer is 360 degrees more
Yes.
difficult, than it is if you're doing it,
Yes.
within a proscenium,
Right.
frame. So how do you approach that creatively? I'm guessing that's kind of a big challenge.
Yes. This is actually the first show that I've choreographed in the round. I've done some other things that are like thrust or alley, which is like 2 sides or 3 sides, but there's nowhere to hide anything. And you have to think about, instead of things obviously facing the front and proscenium style, you have to think about angles and things being circular and because everybody can be seen, spreading people out correctly, and sight lines and all sorts of things that
You
aren't
can't hide
as-
anybody at the back, right?
No,
No.
there is no back.
Yeah.
There is no front. It's just everybody is really truly equal. So it's very challenging, but it's also really neat because you do, like Stephen was saying, you get a different perspective and almost a different show depending on which side you're sitting on.
Yeah, and you've chosen, we're seeing some pictures now from rehearsals, but you've chosen Lionel Bart's Oliver as your first production. And this is ambitious, not only because of the staging, but because the cast is really large.
Yeah.
I think 30 or so people.
We have over 30 in the cast.
And a lot of them are kids.
Yes.
Nearly half. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Nearly half.
But I would say that's kind of where our heart is, though. My background is in theater education. And so that was my
And you used to teach at Bard?
I did, yeah. I was the theater teacher there for 4 years, and loved my time in the classroom, and always wanted the lifelong dream is to start my own theater organization. So it was just the right time. And one of the things about Oliver is it's a classic. It's a Tony and Olivier award-winning show. There's so many memorable numbers in the show, but we really wanted to program something that was family focused and friendly. So, you can have a night out with the entire family, but also would feature young artists. Like, that was something that we felt really kind of compelled and committed to. So, and we love character work.
We
I mean,
do.
the two of us, and when we're staging and thinking through things, you want it to be a fresh approach too. And we always think, okay, how could we justify including this insane prop or making this
Right.
zany character choice? And the show really has so much heart with the characters that are in it.
Mhm.
And we've discovered that even more so as we've been blocking and staging the show too.
Yeah, and being inclusive, I mean, I know that one of the goals is to get people involved, even if they may not have a background in dance or musical theater. If people are interested in, first of all, seeing this show, just tell us a little bit about how they can. And then if they want to get involved in the troupe going forward, how they can.
rivercitytheater.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tickets are live now, and they're going quickly. So we're encouraging people to go ahead and book in advance. But we're running July 17th through the 27th, and all of the performances are in the evening at 7 p.m. But tickets are available through rivercitytheater.com. And like we said before, if you come, bring a few people with you, and then if you love it, which we promise you will, come back and you can see a completely different show from a different angle. But yeah, they're live now, and it's at the Episcopal Church of the Good Shepherd over in Riverside.
All right. Well, Katie Rollerson-Padilla, Stephen Billy, congratulations. Break a leg.
Thank you so much.
All right. That's our program. Thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform and at WJCT.org. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett and directed by Brady Coram. Our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us tomorrow when we discuss the week's headlines with our panel of journalists, from deep cuts impacting Jacksonville's Emerald Trail to deep fakes compromising State Department head Marco Rubio. I'm Ann Schindler.
Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Museum of Science and History's new exhibition, Mosh Archives, the story of us and you, steps you into a treasure trove of memories now through August 31st. Tickets and information at themosh.org.